Hello everyone, back again with movie and tune recap. Today, I'm going to explain an American supernatural horror film from 2016, titled We Go On. Spoilers ahead, so watch out and take care. The movie opens with a man driving when suddenly his steering wheel and brakes stop working. The car speeds uncontrollably, leading to a violent crash, but it turns out to be a dream. The man is Miles Grissom, a video editor at a production company who frequently watches footage of a professor during work. At home, Miles experiences the same recurring nightmare of dying in a car accident. The next day, desperate to find relief from his overwhelming fear of death, he contacts an advertising company to place a classified ad offering $30,000 to anyone who can provide definitive proof of life after death, or the existence of ghosts. Miles usually takes the bus to work, and one day he notices in the newspaper that his ad has already been published. The following day, his mother, Charlotte, visits him after the ad goes viral. She is upset that Miles is willing to waste $30,000 on what she considers a meaningless pursuit instead of investing it in his future. During their conversation, it is revealed that Miles lost his father when he was 3 years old. Together, Miles and Charlotte review hundreds of video submissions from people claiming to have proof of the afterlife. However, Miles realizes that many of the videos are fake or staged. He also shows Charlotte a voicemail from an unknown caller who claims to be able to show him real ghosts. Despite the large number of responses, Miles narrows his search down to 3 candidates: Dr. Ben Ellison, psychic medium Josefina, and entrepreneur Emmett Frum. Miles watches the video submission from Dr. Ben Ellison, who claims he can help Miles see ghosts through a scientific approach, by stimulating his fear center and forcing him to confront a childhood trauma. Josefina, the psychic medium, promises to show Miles his own death from a past life, while Emmett Frum claims to possess a rare Tibetan box whose mysterious contents can alter a person's entire perception of reality. The next day, Miles decides to visit Dr. Ellison, and his mother, Charlotte, accompanying him in her car. When they arrive, Dr. Ellison explains that he intends to trigger a ghostly encounter by amplifying Miles's fear and revisiting a traumatic memory from his childhood at St. Timothy Middle School in Temecula, where his classmate Kieran Seville died inside locker 530, later known as the coffin locker. That night, they go to the school and get permission from the security guard to stay on the premises for an hour. Dr. Ellison sets up his equipment and gives Miles a headset so they can communicate during the experiment. Once everything is ready, Miles is instructed to walk through the school while calling Kieran's name. He makes his way upstairs to the locker and opens it, but at first, nothing happens, until he suddenly sees something terrifying. Panicking, Miles runs out of the school after encountering what appears to be Kieran's ghost. Dr. Ellison tries to calm him down, but Charlotte soon discovers that the so-called ghost was actually a boy in costume, hiding in the building. However, Ellison insists that Miles truly saw Kieran's ghost and claims that the young actor was only meant as a backup to heighten Miles's senses in case the experiment failed. On their way home, Miles feels disappointed and decides to visit Josefina the next day. However, Charlotte is against the idea and tries to convince him to stop pursuing his ghostly experiences, telling him that deep down he knows it will not work. Miles insists he still wants to try, and the two reminisce about his childhood and the time when his father was still alive. The following day, Miles and Charlotte visit Josefina, who claims she can show Miles his own death from a past life. She begins acting strangely, talking to unseen people, which makes Charlotte suspect she is on drugs. Josefina denies this and continues behaving erratically before pulling Miles into her room. Claiming she can see dead people, Josefina tells him that the spirits do not like his presence, and when she becomes increasingly unstable, Miles leaves the room. Josefina follows him, explaining that a strangled man named Bill does not want Miles to continue. Charlotte insists they leave and tells Josefina that although Miles' father was named William, he never went by Bill and died in a car accident, not by asphyxiation. The next day, Miles and Charlotte visit Emmett Frum's house, and while searching through his mother's purse, Miles finds a small gun, which Charlotte says she carries for protection. Moments later, Miles unexpectedly runs into a friend who works in special effects. When he realizes that his friend had rigged From's house with holograms and effects to deceive him, Miles leaves feeling dejected. Back at home, Charlotte tries to cheer up Miles, who has lost hope in the people he once believed could help him encounter a ghost. She talks to him about life and sacred things, and their conversation lifts his spirits slightly. That night at work, Miles watches a video of the professor, and after listening to the voicemail from the unknown caller, he learns that a girl died inside her grandfather's clock. Shockingly, he sees the ghost of the same girl appear in the video he is watching. Later at home, while his mother sleeps, Miles takes her car keys. Despite his phobia of driving, believing that driving is how he will die, he drives her car anyway. He follows a mysterious lead and meets Nelson Kinney, an airport runway worker, at a fenced-off park near LAX. Nelson turns out to be the unknown caller who sent the voicemail. When Miles asks how Nelson knows about the girl who died in the clock, Nelson claims that her ghost showed him. Nelson tells Miles he will soon understand everything and that once a door opens, it doesn't close again. He explains that whenever he feels afraid, he thinks of his girlfriend, Alice, and Nelson then takes Miles to an abandoned house. Although Miles hesitates, fearing he might be attacked or robbed, Nelson assures him he is unarmed and only wants to show him something real. They enter the house in a small room, where Miles is horrified to find Nelson's dead body lying on the floor, and he collapses in shock. When Miles regains consciousness, Nelson's body grabs him and says, "We're together now," causing Miles to faint again. When he finally wakes, he flees the house in terror. Miles rushes into a public restroom to calm himself, but he soon begins experiencing repeated visions of ghosts. On his drive home, the car radio turns on by itself, and ghostly voices begin to whisper. Terrified, he abandons the car and takes a bus, but the haunting voices persist, and he sees a vision of Alice. At home, Miles is deeply shaken by the experience and struggles to explain it to Charlotte, who begins to suspect that he may have been drugged. On the bus heading to retrieve Charlotte's car, where Miles had abandoned it, he tells his mother that he met a ghost who showed him its own dead body. Suddenly, Miles sees another ghost on the bus. Realizing that her son is truly experiencing haunting visions, Charlotte confesses that Miles' father did go by the name Bill and that he actually hanged himself, just as Josefina had said. Shocked and angry, Miles realizes that Josefina was telling the truth, and he stops the bus and returns to her place to meet her. Josefina explains that Nelson is now tethered to Miles, meaning Nelson cannot kill or possess him, but if Miles dies, the spirit will go with him. Miles comes to understand that Nelson wants him to kill his ex-girlfriend, Alice, so that her spirit can cross over with his and release the tether. However, Josefina tells Miles that she was once in a similar situation and asks him what good it would do to take another person's life just to save his own. Haunted by constant visions of ghosts, Miles goes to retrieve his mother's car. Back at home, Charlotte apologizes to him for lying about how his father really died. Miles explains to her what is now happening to him, and as fear begins to overwhelm her, Charlotte starts catching glimpses of Nelson's ghost in the car with them. When Charlotte asks what Josefina said about breaking the tether, Miles at first stays silent. But when she insists, he finally admits that to untether Nelson's ghost, he must find Alice and end her life. Though Miles is completely against the idea, Charlotte is willing to do anything to save her son. The next day, Miles and Charlotte attend Nelson's funeral, where Miles encounters another ghost. During the funeral, Alice unexpectedly arrives, leaving Charlotte and Miles stunned, and after the service, Miles approaches her and introduces himself. They talk about Nelson, and while Alice curses him for what he did, she is glad that Nelson is dead. Suddenly, Alice begins to see Nelson's ghost. Confused and frightened, she asks Miles what is happening, and Miles explains that Nelson's spirit has been haunting him ever since, and Alice realizes that Nelson wants Miles to harm her. Miles assures her that he will not let Nelson get what he wants and urges her to say her final goodbye to Nelson. As Alice kneels before Nelson's grave to do so, Charlotte attempts to shoot Alice to save her son, but discovers that Miles had removed the bullets from her gun. In tears, Charlotte breaks down, realizing that her plan to save her son has failed, and she asks Miles what will happen next. Seeing ghostly hands outside the car window, Miles tells his mother that to protect Alice, he has accepted being permanently haunted by Nelson. He says he will take Nelson to the airport every morning, since Nelson loved the sound of airplanes, and maybe then he will be allowed to live a normal life. In one scene, Miles stands on his balcony, appearing ready to jump, but Nelson's ghost gestures for him not to. However, Miles only laughs, teasing the spirit. With life seemingly returning to normal, Charlotte prepares to travel, and Miles gives her $30,000 to deliver to Josefina on her way. Later, Miles goes to the airport park where Nelson used to take walks, and Alice finds him there. They talk for a while, but fearing that Miles might eventually go back on his word and try to harm her, Alice suddenly shoots him. Alice explains that she had a child with another man, which led Nelson to threaten to kill her baby. To escape his constant threats, she intentionally tainted Nelson's heroin, causing his death in the abandoned house. Sitting beside the dying Miles, Alice curses Nelson, telling him to burn in hell. However, Miles tells her there is no hell, and Alice flees as he bleeds out. Meanwhile, Charlotte arrives at Josefina's house to deliver the money. When she experiences a vision of William, Josefina urgently tells her to go back to her son. At the same time, a flashback shows a young Miles with his parents, who are debating over who should take him to work that day. They let Miles choose, and he picks his mother, and suddenly, Miles wakes up, revived by paramedics, and reunites with Charlotte. A few days later, Miles has gotten his own car and begins to suspect that he is no longer haunted, as he starts to overcome his fear of death. Okay guys, that's all the recap about We Go On from 2016. Thanks for watching, see you again in the next video.